8:07 in the morning. You're on Wake Up Tucson, 1030 The Voice, local news talk. Christopher D. Simone, Matthew D. Neely, Esquire. And joining me for this hour, we're still trying to get Mr. Levin on the phone. But Dave Slavin is here live and not Memorex. David.
And not on the phone.
That's true. How are you doing, sir?
Doing good. Good morning. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
And nice to see Matt.
He's looking amazing today. Very strong and lusty today, what I would say.
Again?
Thank you. So why don't we start while we're tracking down Tony? If people want, you met someone for the first time and they say, why should I care about an interview with some guy named Tony Levin, which most people probably listening to this show would go, what's a Tony Levin?
Well, one of the greatest bass players that I'm aware of. You talked about one of the greatest bass players of the last 40 years. He's one of the greatest bass players. I think the electric bass and the bass, of course, in rock and roll, we're just talking about a 70-year history anyway, but he definitely is one of the greatest bass players from the start of that time till now.
Right.
And his command of the bass, and when you listen to his solo albums, command of the cello, an instrument called the Chapman stick, which was invented almost 50 years ago, which is kind of bass-like, doesn't really look like a bass, doesn't really look like
bass.
A fretless bass, but, you know, some guitar players could play it, but it seems like only bass players play it.
That's true.
So one of the questions that I want to have, that I want to ask Tony, so how come he gravitated to that, and how come bass players seem to gravitate to that more than guitar players?
So he's touring with a group called Beat. You saw Beat in September up in Phoenix.
Up in Phoenix, yes. Outstanding show. Adrian Belew, who used to be a part of King Crimson from 81 till 2006, along with Tony.
Yep.
Steve Vai, who was a part of Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And then Steve Vai's had an incredible career as a guitar player. Frequently, he's come to Tucson with the with the Jimi Hendrix or Experience Hendrix project. And Danny Carey from a band named Tool on drums. Great bunch of, a great band.
Gotcha. I will tell you that I've seen Tony a couple of times live already. He is amazing. And I saw him in 94 when Crimson did their double trio in the 90s. So they had two drummers, Tony on bass, Trey Gunn on stick, the fretless bass.
Right.
And then Fripp and Adrian Belew playing guitar with Adrian doing vocals. And what was amazing about this, and maybe we can talk, we'll see how much time we have with Tony, is you had two different rhythm sections in the same band playing in two different time signatures.
And that would have,
right?
That would have been incredible to see.
Yeah, and so just tell you, so a guy that he's played a lot with is my boy Bill Bruford from Yes, King Crimson, and a great solo career. And I remember a good interview with the other drummer, Pat Mastellato, who played a little bit more with Crimson. And they're sitting with Fripp, and he explains the idea. Robert Fripp's the guitarist and kind of group leader, how he wanted one to play in one time signature and the other guy to play in the other time signature. And Bill Bruford, being the talented wise ass that he is, said, well, I can do both of those two different time signatures if you want, and then have Pat do something else, which Pat was struggling with the idea that he was going to have to play, especially when live, right?
Right.
Right. One side of the group is playing in one time signature. And so I know it sounds complicated, but when it comes together, it sounds amazing.
Well, Robert Fripp always does some amazing things. I saw Levin play with, you did too, with King Crimson a few years ago at the Talking Stick Resort up in Phoenix.
On the last Crimson tour ever.
3 drummers.
Yes.
And Tony Levin. And that was incredible to see them pull that off.
And you saw him, and we'll probably start off with this when we talk to him. You saw him with the Herbie Mann group in the 70s.
In 1976, I checked the dates last week, November 3rd, November 4th, at the University of Arizona Main Auditorium. My group, ASUA Concerts Productions, produced The Evolution of Man. Herbie Mann, Tony Levin, the legendary guitarist Albert Lee.
Wow.
Rick Marotta, legendary drummer who went on to play with Carly Simon and Linda Ronstadt. And
now, he's related to Jerry?
He's Jerry's brother.
Right. And so Jerry's the drummer that plays with Peter Gabriel and Tony Levin.
And so, I mean, just an incredible band. And I'm a 21-year-old kid just taking all this in. Not really much of a jazz fan, but boy, it was a really incredible experience. What I can remember. The memory's foggy, but what I can remember.
Is that because of age or something else?
I think it's probably because of something else.
What a hellion. What a hellion.
Wowie, wow.
Like I said, it's something where if you've ever seen for any of you who've seen Peter Gabriel live, there's a guy with a clean shaved bald head and a mustache going crazy on the bass. That's Tony. And we are going to talk to Tony in a few minutes after the break. So, again, every interview I've ever seen with Tony, he's just been so open and cool to talk to. And he's a Boston guy.
And such a well-spoken man. He really is eloquent. And for a couple of lay people like us who don't really know the true intricacies of music, he can talk to anybody, or it appears that way. We'll find out, huh?
We'll see if we blow it or not. So, all right, Matt, you ready? Let's go to break. You're on Wake Up Tucson, 10:30 The Voice. Local news and talk. Dave Slavin, Christy Simone, Tony Levin's coming up next on Wake Up Tucson, and this is what we call the funk fingers. He has two little drumsticks on his fingers, and he plays the bass. That's the beginning of this one called Sleepless. Wake up. All right, one of my favorite from that era off the Beat album, Neil and Jack and Me, King Crimson. Dave Slavin's here, and we're going to be talking to Tony Levin of Beat, King Crimson. Of course, been working for years and years. I consider him one of the best bassists of the last 40 years. He has a new album called Bringing It Down to the Bass, which our friend Dave actually bought the CD, God bless him, and has cool pictures of Tony's basses in it. So.
He makes more money when you buy a physical copy than when you stream it.
Tony Levin.
There's that. I hadn't heard about that. Hey, guys, thanks for having me on.
Good morning, Tony.
And of course, thanks for buying that CD. Wow, that's it's something special.
I had to look at the pictures inside the insert.
Yeah, that was a big part of it to me. You know, I'm a bass player. I'm also a photographer, and I begged the record label to let me put a pretty considerable amount of photos of my basses in with the package, because the album's about the bass, and they're not just photos, they're kind of portraits I took of the various basses, and it was important to me to include them.
Well, it's all the reason why to buy a physical copy rather than streaming. And plus, you make more money.
Tony, are we the only show to admit that we bought the Tony Levin solos album?
I think you're the only guys to buy it. You know what? I only sold one. So now we traced it. We've been trying to find out who bought this thing. So thank you. I very much appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. And my wife loves it. So
that's great.
It was a big hit in the Slavin household.
I do love the picture.
That's great.
I love the picture of your dad's sculpture of you playing the bass.
Thanks. Yeah, and we superimposed it with a picture of me playing the bass, and an amazing story. Really, I only realized that about a year ago. I have this sculpture my dad did when I was 8 years old. It's in my house, and I looked at it and I thought, gee, it's a bald guy. I am bald, by the way, and a kind of slim guy bent around his instrument. And I thought, I didn't play bass when he did that, and it's been in my house ever since. And how amazing that I ended up being that guy in the statue.
Yeah, pretty neat.
So our friend Dave here saw I guess baby Tony Levin in the early days. So please explain to Dave. Dave, please explain to Tony when you first saw him.
Okay, back in 1976, I was a part of a concert production group at the University of Arizona, and we produced 2 nights with Herbie Mann called The Evolution of Man. And I've wanted to ask this question of you for 40 years because memories get hazy. But I remember Albert Lee was on guitar, the legendary Albert Lee. Rick Marotta was on drums. Armin Halburian was the percussionist.
Correct.
Pat
Yeah.
Ribelet, I believe. Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Dave's
Was on
geeking out on you here, buddy.
Ribelow is
okay.
how he pronounced it.
And
yeah.
Tony Levin on bass. Weren't you there?
I was there, sure.
You were there.
Wouldn't have missed it.
All right. That was
76, so I was kind of old then. No, I had been playing with Herbie Mann a long time. He didn't do tours like rock bands do. By the way, we're the show in Tucson, the Beach Show, is going to be our 64th show on this tour.
That's amazing.
So a jazz tour is not quite like that. So Herbie went out mostly weekends, 3-day, 4-day weekends. And for those of us who were studio musicians and jazz players in New York City, it was a great gig because Herbie was a great player. He put together terrific bands, different band every weekend, by the way, not always the same guys, but always good guys. And so it was a pleasure to come out west and do that show.
It was quite an experience for us. We took a van to bring the band back to the hotel. I believe you stayed at the Arizona Inn. And we get to the airport, and Herbie's standing at the rental car counter. And we said, "You don't need a rental car. We've got a van here." He goes, "No, I'm going to rent a car." And we said, "Well, where's everybody else?" He goes, "Well, they all come in at their own time, and they'll take care of themselves."
It's jazz, baby. It's loose. It's loose, baby.
Yes. Yeah, we were grateful to have the hotel. Yeah, the hotel paid for it.
Tony with Beat is playing the music of 1980's King Crimson December 17th at the Fox Theater here in Tucson downtown. So I want to ask you a question. Dave and I were at the last Crimson tour when you guys played in Phoenix. I probably dwelled up a little bit when Starless played at the end. You know why I love John Wetton so much? That it's kind of part of my thing. I'm breaking up thinking about it right now. Look at me. What I was going to say was, I know Adrian Ballou wanted to be part of that last tour, and then Robert's Robert, and then Robert Fripp. Talk about the evolution of going to do the last tour without Adrian kind of knowing he wanted to do that, and then how did it kind of morph into the Beat situation?
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's a whole bunch of subjects. Let me first say that no, that's great. I love it. John Wetton, I'm a big fan of his bass playing. He was if not the original, one of the early players in King Crimson before I joined the band. So we're talking about in the 1970s.
Yep. And
an interesting challenge for me on that tour. Oh no, all the King Crimson tours from the 90s until the one you're talking about, an interesting challenge was how to approach his parts, these iconic bass parts, and I want to stay true to what was very special about that part, but I also want to be myself. It's not really, King Crimson doesn't want to be a cover band playing exactly what it was before, so that was an interesting challenge through for years for me on the road, playing pieces like the one you mentioned and Red, great old stuff, and trying to keep what's special, but also be myself. So that was an interesting challenge. Another challenge in King Crimson was Robert Fripp kept changing the lineup. He'd go a few years, and then Robert Fripp is the guitar player, founder of the band. It's really been his band and his vision that guides what King Crimson is and what it isn't. And you're feeling, in my case, I'm feeling really good about an incarnation like the one we had in the 90s, and then suddenly it's different guys, and maybe I'm in the band, maybe I'm not. So yes, I missed Adrian in the last incarnation, and I wouldn't have chosen for him not to be there, but I took a deep breath and followed Robert's vision, which was to have different guys, and it was a very, very good band, a valid band, and we did a lot of great shows.
So talk about the. So I know that basically after that happened, I guess Adrian approached Robert about doing '80s Crimson, that era. And then
boy, you've done your homework. You know a little more than I do about this.
I don't. This is my jam, Tony Levin. This is my jam. So, explain the origin of Beat off of.
Yeah. Well, from my end, what I know about it was that for about the last 5 years, Adrian has been wanting to revisit the music of the '80s because it's really valid music, and he hasn't got to play it in a long time. Occasionally, Adrian and I do play together and play some of that music, but maybe for a night or two, or special concert or gathering. So he wanted to form a band. I'm not sure whether he wanted the original guys or not, but anyway, with Robert's blessing, he wanted to get other players And it took 5 years really to find a time that we all had our schedules free. He didn't just get any players, of course. Steve Vai is a fantastic guitar player and one of the few who can even think about trying to cover Robert Fripp's guitar parts. Danny Carey of Tool is a fantastic drummer, and it's a joy being with those guys on the road. But anyway, it took 5 years for Adrian to put together the schedule and have the guys locked into it. And now that we've begun the tour, we're really loving it and kind of growing more into it. We called the tour Beat. That was the second of the 3 albums of the King Crimson era in the 80s. And I think it's Robert Fripp. I could be wrong here, but I think it's Robert Fripp who not only gave it his blessing, but said to Adrian, you should call this the Beat Tour. That would be a good name for it.
Why? What for the average bear listening right now? What defined that '80s Crimson on why it was that whole new chapter? And as Bill Bruford, one of my favorite quotes from Bill is, "It's the only place I can play, only band I can play odd time signatures and still stay at a Marriott." So explain that to us. What defined '80s Crimson?
Yeah, first of all, you're asking the wrong guy because I'm inside it and I'm on the bass player and I'm probably the worst guy to describe what it's like to the listener because I'm on the other side of the thing. But I think it's really valid music, really challenging music. Yes, there's, like Bill hinted, there's a lot that's not in 4/4. And I've been told it influenced a lot of other bands. We were certainly trying to do stuff in the 80s that wasn't being done then, and carve out new territory, which is a kind of one of the guiding principles of King Crimson in every incarnation, at least to try to do that. So I think it's pretty valid music, and I think what you get when you see the Beat show is that the joy of me and Adrian revisiting that music, but also the kick in the pants of Danny Carey and Steve Vai joining us and kind of taking it slightly different places and adding their own flavor to it. So there's something special about that.
Tony, we got a hard news break coming up. Can we borrow you for another segment or so?
Absolutely.
Awesome. We're hanging out with the great Tony Levin. Go to foxtucson.com to get your tickets. I mean, I am so thrilled they're coming on 65 shows here, which is just amazing. So check them out.
Well, thank you.
It's the highest level of musicianship you may see on the Fox stage this year. So little elephant talk to take us to the news. Wake up, Tucson. All right. That's Tony Levin with 2 talented guys. Terry Bozzio and Steve Stevens. He just doesn't play for Billy Idol anymore, as we like to say. Tony Levin, welcome back to Wake Up Tucson, sir.
Thanks. I'm glad you guys are having me on. Thank you. And nice to hear that track. I haven't heard in a while.
I love that album, dude. Love the Blacklight Syndrome. Just love that album.
Yeah, you know what? When you that was what I call a collaborative album. And when you put together that kind of a band, you hope for the best. You write the music quick. I've done a lot of that kind of thing, and it's great. You hope it clicks, and when it does, you got this problem. It's a good problem to have, but yeah, the music really we did 2 albums, by the way, Blacklight Syndrome. Yeah, and you hope you can tour with it and see where the music can grow to, but you're not, it wasn't a band that was formed, so you're all busy doing other stuff. So we really never got to tour with that music, which is a shame, and that sometimes happens with that kind of collaborative album.
I tell any of my friends in the rock instrumental, prog world, you throw that in your spindle, dude.
Yeah. Hey, Terry Bozzio's drum set must have taken up the whole stage.
It's a little bigger than Tucson.
A little, yeah. I've seen it once, and I was just blown away.
It's unbelievable.
How does he know
every
which
day
one to
when
play?
I have toured with him with a different band, another put together with Alan Holdsworth, Hobo Lima, we call it, was the first 2 letters of each guy's name. And just every day I looked at his drum kit like I couldn't believe it. At about 5 o'clock after the tech had built it, because it takes all day to put it together.
Wow.
So
now, speaking of strange instruments,
yes, sir.
You play an instrument called the Chapman stick, which a lot of our listeners might not be aware of what it looks like, but it looks like a stick with strings. And 10 or 12.
Good description, Dave.
Yeah, stick with strings, 10 or 12 strings from what I've read about it. I'm not a musician. I don't think
You're
Chris
right.
is either. But it seems like only bass players play the Chapman stick. Why is that?
Interesting. It's an interesting instrument. It has bass strings. It has guitar strings. I play the 12 string, so it's got a stereo output with 6 bass strings and 6 guitar strings, and that's only the beginning of what's unusual about it. Like you said, it's stick shaped, or it's like the neck of a guitar, a wide neck of a guitar with, heck, who needs that body? You kind of hook it into your belt, and you can be the bass player, or you can be the guitar player, or you can be both. And great fun. and I formed a band called Thick Men with another player of a touch-style instrument, by the way. You don't pluck it. You hammer on or touch-style play it. So very interesting. I've been playing it a lot lately on the Beat Tour because I played it a lot in King Crimson in the 80s, and the reason I did that is when I first got together with Bill Bruford and Adrian Belew and Robert Fripp and heard how radically different these three guys play than most players of their instruments. I looked at my bass and I looked at the kind of weird Chapman stick, and I thought, okay, I'm going to pick up the Chapman stick, and that's the instrument of choice I'm going to use on most of this material. So here I am many years later playing a whole lot of Chapman stick in the show. It's a good instrument. It's versatile, and I have found it particularly useful in progressive rock where you're trying to not do business as usual. You're trying to carve out some new territory musically.
Well, so you're doing that, and Bill's playing the Simmons electronic drums.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You know your stuff. Yeah. It made for an unusual sound and an unusual place to begin when you compose your new music. Is
Bill the guy you played the most with, drummer-wise, recording and otherwise? Is that a fair statement?
Probably not. No, I played with him in the 80s and in the 90s, but I've been at this a long time. I would say Steve Gadd, a wonderful player, Jerry Marotta, and Pat Mastelotto, who was in a few of the incarnations of King Crimson, but we also have this band called Stickman together.
So just bring up Mastelotto. So I saw you guys double trio 94 in Phoenix, and explain having two different rhythm sections going on at the same time. Explain recording and then live on that, please.
I don't know, but here I'll explain it from a different angle. When you're in a band with Robert Fripp, and he says, okay, Tony, I broke up the band a few years ago. I have a new idea. This is back to the early 90s. I have a new idea. You play the Chapman stick, but we're going to have another guy, Trey Gunn, who plays the Chapman stick. And what do you think of that idea? And I take a deep breath, and I say, I don't really know that I love that idea, but I didn't say this to him, but I have faith in Robert's, how should I put it, his musical vision. So I took a deep breath, and I was in the 90s incarnation with two stick players, and it was very unusual and very challenging and very much worth it. Musically, it worked out great. Trey Gunn is a great stick player, by the way. Okay, then that band disbanded somewhere around, 2012. He said, okay, what do you think about three drummers? And again, I took the same deep breath, and you mean, should I not play or anything? I don't know what I'll do. But took a deep breath and said, okay, it's his vision. I'm going to put my full musical positive energy into it, and it ended up, once again, being worth it. He didn't just get three drummers. He got three particular drummers who fashioned parts that really weren't clattery and busy and over full. So it's an amazing and unusual and groundbreaking way to have more than one drummer in a band. And for me, it worked out fine.
Think of your Mastelotto. We're going to add two drummers to you, Pat.
It was incredible. When you're in front of the stage, the power of those three drummers was just. You talked about, well, you're playing the music and it's a different perspective from listening to it. Well, the power that those three dealt out or put out was just absolutely astounding. It was astonishing and made for a great evening.
And how is this for unusual? Robert decided to put them at the front of the stage. So the other guys in the band were on risers behind them, looking down at this musical circus show of the three guys passing riffs back and forth, and some drum fills went across the whole width of the stage, left to right. Yeah, amazing stuff. And of course, I got to hear it and watch it every night from up in the air above it. It was fun.
How did you navigate that? Because I know Gavin Harrison did a lot of the kind of. I felt like he kind of organized a bunch of that.
You're exactly right.
How did you navigate through all three drummers and what Gavin was putting together with them?
Well, for one thing, it wouldn't have been as easy if we didn't have in-ear monitors in our own mixers. So each of us could adjust things, and each piece I could tweak whether I want a little more Pat or a little less of, a little less of Gavin or something like that. So I could tweak it in that way. But the musical part is important. They had these arrangements they had worked out weren't so busy. I had. Not feared, but my first thought with three drummers is, well, I'm going to play a lot less, and there's going to be a lot less room sonically down low where the bass lives and where I like the bass to live, and so I'm going to have to kind of thin out my sound a little bit to find an area, frequency area that you can hear me in. Well, that ended up not the case. There never were two guys playing the bass drum at the same time, so it was really very easy. And in fact, I thickened my sound. Once I heard it and we rehearsed a lot, I realized I could have the same sound I had, or even thicken it a little bit.
And then you have Mel Collins standing next to you on the saxophone and flutes, and just adding. It was just
great
incredible.
Player. Yeah, great player, and an alumnus of the early King Crimson. He had been in it way before me, and in the 70s he was in the band, and then he was revisiting the band. Let me just tell you a little thing about a kind of one of the King Crimson traditions that we don't talk about publicly much is when you make a mistake in a band that complex, the audience can't necessarily tell. So at least Robert Fripp and I have a habit of if we make a mistake, we kind of glare at the guy next to us on stage as if it was his fault. And at least half the people who notice the mistake think it's that. Okay, now fast forward to Mel Collins is next. I'm the bass player, and he's next to me with the flute. And not the ideal guy to try to blame a bass mistake on, but I still tried it occasionally. I make enough mistakes that I got to experiment, and at least the band got a kick out of me trying to convince the audience that it was a flute mistake that was on the bass.
Yeah, Mel always looks so weird with his glass around him all the time. Was that like not to hurt Pat's ear with his blaring? What was going on there?
That's very funny. It's the opposite. The drums, because the drums were in front of him and all around the microphone. If he didn't have the plastic up, then all you would hear in his microphone was drums.
Gotcha. That makes too much sense. David, what you got for Tony?
Well, on your solo album, excuse me, on your solo album, you have a song, Espressoville, and you posted to Facebook a video of that, and it was just incredible. Did you do the animation for that?
No, I got a friend who does that, AJ Chippero, and he's wonderful, and he did it quick. He did it in a few days. I said to him, you know what? I heard about this thing. I drink a lot of espresso, by the way, if you can't tell from the speed I'm talking. I heard about this thing called National Espresso Day. I don't know or care what it meant, but I have a piece called Espressoville that, by the way, the piece begins with my espresso machine, as every day begins with that drip, drip, drip. So I thought, how appropriate would it be? Wouldn't it be appropriate to have a little video of that song? And I asked my buddy, and he made it in a few days, and we put it out happily.
Well, it was very entertaining to listen to and to watch.
We're talking to Tony Levin from Beat, performing the music of 80s King Crimson with Adrian Belew, Steve Vai, and Danny Carey from Tool. And they'll be at the Fox Theater on December 17th, foxtucson.com to get your tickets. Tony, I as you go through here, talk about the balance of performing, right? And then in this weird world of streaming, and Dave did buy your CD, as we like to say. Okay. How does the balance of being artistic, making enough money to do fuel your dreams and pay your bills? How does that work for a guy who's been doing it for so long? How has that evolved from 70s, 80s to now that we're in 2024? What does that look like?
Very good question. Once again, you know what I'm good at? Bass playing. You know what I'm not good at? Figuring out the music business. Oh my God, I hadn't figured it out in the 70s, and it's changing every couple of years. So it has changed. First of all, I'm aware for a long time how lucky I am that I get to play with really good players, not all of whom are famous, but I get to record and play live, even in the town I live in, with really good players, because that's why I picked up the bass in the first place when I was a kid. I wanted to play music, and I wanted to play good music. So I realized at this point in my career how lucky I am to do that at all. To make a decent living from it is a bonus, and that's great, and I'm indeed lucky that way. The rules have been changed. You used to try to get a record deal if you had a band or solo album. You try to get a record deal, and you were at the mercy of record companies who weren't always kind to their artists. But if you succeeded and having that record, then of course you try to have some record sales. But for guys like me, the main thing then and now was touring. You put out your record, and then you'd go do what you love, which is to play your music in front of people who maybe appreciate it or maybe know it a little bit, and that's great. That's why we're doing it. So that hasn't changed. But the business of putting out records, remember the expression radio play, and trying to get it played on the radio, so someone would have heard it, so it would sell a lot, so you could do your tour. Oh gosh, that's changed a lot. And like you said, streaming changed everything. But I'm lucky, and quite a few of us still get to play the music we want live, and that's what I live for. And specifically in Tucson, those who come are going to see how happy we are, how really joyful we are to be making our music in our own way on stage in front of an audience that appreciates it.
Real quick, your streaming revenue per month, is it more or less than $100?
I don't look at it. Since this record came out, I haven't looked at it, but I almost never looked at it. But I used to get checks for a fraction of a penny. I don't know how that can work. How can you get a check for a tenth of a penny?
Hey, I got to
save them. Of course, I didn't take them into the bank. Excuse me.
I got a question. Your solo album is fabulous. Do you actually sit down in the studio one day and say, hey, I'm going to make a solo album? Or did that just happen to evolve over several years? You'd record a track at a time, send it out, have the drums put on it, and bring it back and mix it. How did that evolve?
Thanks. Thanks for paying attention to my album. I appreciate that. Oh, it's different for everybody, for every album. In my case, I tour really a lot with King Crimson, with Peter Gabriel, with Stickman, and I have a jazz band with my brother Pete, which we call Levin Brothers, a clever name that we came up with.
Original.
So that's what I love doing. That's what I do when I'm home in between touring. Of course, I write music because I'm a musician, and if you add up the years and tours of me being home a little bit, I found maybe a year and a half ago I realized I have maybe 30 or 40 tracks, and if I don't carve out some time to complete the tracks, then they're just never, why am I even doing this? So I did carve out 2 months early this year to pick which 14 of them I'm going to use on the album, and to add the other players, of course. I had drum ideas, but I hadn't added the drummers, and I didn't have the luxury of going into the studio with one rhythm section, but in a way, I thought I'd give myself the gift of, for each piece, I thought of, well, who's the drummer I'd most like, who would really surprise me? I know a lot of drummers, by the way, who would really surprise me with their playing. And so I got different drummers on almost every track, and different guitar players, kind of a who's who of whom I've worked with, and that was great fun for me. And now when I listen to the tracks, the part I enjoy the most is hearing what these other guys did with my music.
So coming up on the tour, so right now, what is still, even though I'm sure you've played it multiple times, what's on the set list right now with Beat that you still really got to pay attention to get it right?
I'm glad you put it that way. Well, half of it I have to really pay attention to. This is some really tricky stuff. Sometimes because I'm playing counter rhythms with myself, the stick bass and the stick guitar part are not in the same time signature, and maybe then I'm singing a third time signature with Adrian. I'm singing background vocal. Adrian does fantastic lead vocal, and he just can do that stuff, counter rhythms. So that's very challenging, but also we're not sticking tightly to the arrangements, so Danny Carey behind me on the drums just throws wild cards at me all the time. So I'm not perplexed. I'm joyful that he's doing that. But yes, I have to be on my toes to just keep up with the complexity of what's going on stage.
What's one or two songs right now that you're playing that it's your favorite when you see it? It's coming up, it's coming, and everyone's just nailing it. What is it right now?
Yeah, I'm not a guy who has favorites of anything, really, except, I have my favorite wife and my favorite daughter.
Thank you.
You know what? I'll just tell you kind of an inside thing about me. Favorites, there's a whole lot that I see it coming up pieces in any set that I think that's great. It's the one that you see it coming up and you think, oh, geez, I didn't play this so good the other night. Those are the ones I focus on. Instead of saying to myself, this is my least favorite, I say to myself, this is the one I need to work the most on making my part better. I need to make this really come alive for myself. So actually a lot of my musical energy goes into that. I think we start the set with a very complex, very busy thing. Usually you don't. You kind of ease the audience and the front of house sound engineer into the sound that the band is going to have. We don't do that. We start with a piece called Neurotica that's very complicated.
Oh, one of my favorites.
Really cross rhythms. Yeah,
favorites.
Wild. And I like the vision of the audience sitting there shocked, like, oh my God. Really, they're King Crimson fans, so they know what was coming. But generally, this is not how you start a show. So that's an exciting part of the show for me, right from the beginning.
I have a question for you. For people that are King Crimson fans and are going to go to the show and love it, what is the future of Beat? Is there a future for Beat, or is it just end after the 65th show?
Good question. I'll two-part answer. One is, in rock and roll, I know better than to predict too far into the future, because so many times in interviews I've said, oh, there's going to be this tour, there's going to be this album, and then there isn't. So there's that. However, we're in the process of talking about exactly that, about what we're going to do next year, and there's a very good chance that we will do stuff next year. What it is and where it is we'll tour, not decided yet.
Any chance for an album of new music?
Album of new music. A lot of fans ask me that on social media. The truth is we haven't even discussed that, so nothing coming. I won't say that we won't discuss it next year, but we haven't even had that conversation.
All right. So I think we're going to get going, but do we get on Three of a Perfect Pair? I know you're doing Sleepless. I think you do Three of a Pair. You guys, I always had a soft spot for Dig Me. Does Dig Me show up on this one?
Oh, yeah. Promise.
I always like Dig Me. I don't know why.
It's completely wild. It's the emotions and feeling of a car in a junkyard in the 50s. And Adrian Ballou wrote these lyrics about it, and with suitably weird music behind it, but kind of has a chorus that...
The chorus is amazing.
I want to get out of here.
Tony Levin, you've been a damn delight, buddy. Great job.
Thank you,
very
Tony.
Kind. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for having me on, and I hope to see you at the show and see some of your followers at the show.
We are planning to see you on the 17th.
Yes, sirree, Tony.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. All the best.